Palestine and which one is South Africa?
Avoidable comparison is with South Africa during the apartheid period. And I must say that having visited South Africa,
So I found some shared characteristics between South Africa and Palestine and colonialism in general. So first of all, we classify what happened in South Africa and what's going on in Palestine as colonialism or settler colonialism, and that's where foreign family units and foreigners move into a region and try to reproduce and take over. So therefore the land of where they're going to is what they really want. And we can see that in South Africa and in Palestine, that it was the land, the resources of the land, not just like the workers. Or so the resources that they want is different from other forms of colonialism because they actually wanted the land, they wanted to live there and reproduce there. So it's like occupation. So that's what we talk about colonialism. And then we have segregation in both Palestine and in South Africa. There was a segregation between those who came and those who were originally in that land. There was clear failures of justice who tried to maintain the racist state in place. There's a suppression of any kind of resistance, and people were punished for resisting and trying to do something that is just. And there was international appeasement for South Africa for a long time. The international community supported South Africa. It allowed it to stay alive. And right now we can see that with Israel, that the international community is not really doing much about ending Israel. So to start off with colonialism, I've explained it as occupation of natives by some foreign power. And so it involves exploiting the resources of the land and exploiting the people who live there. It involves systemic interference and disruption to the norms that the people are used to. So it involves trying to impose an identity on the people, a different way of life, a different way of working, a different education system, a different religion. And it also involves imposing laws that try to preserve the state. And there's where apartheid comes in, that they try to make these kind of laws that are unique and and they don't happen anywhere in the world, just so that they can maintain the colonialist state in the way that it avoids resistance. So what I found, the difference in Palestine is that there's a deliberate effort to let the native people get out of Palestine and replace them completely by a different nation. And they say that the Jewish nation should actually be living in Palestine. The Palestinians should just go to the other Arab countries. Whereas in South Africa, although there was ethnic cleansing, the expectation wasn't that the other races leave South Africa completely. So in Israel, it's the only place right now where colonialism is still dragging on the way it used to in the 20th and 19th century. Only in Israel do we hear of settlements and settlers. Only in Israel do soldiers and armed civilian groups take over hilltops, demolish homes, uproot trees and destroy crops. They shell schools, churches and mosques, plunder water reserves and block access to an indigenous population's freedom of movement and right to earn a living. So these human rights violations were unacceptable in apartheid Africa, but we face them all the time in Israel. And it's just something that is accepted by the international community. When we go on to segregation, we can see that there's structural segregation and there's actual separation between the citizens of the same state favoring one party. And so in South Africa, when we talk about structural segregation, the laws favored the white people, and the other races, there was the blacks, there was the Indians, and then there was the colored people, and they were treated in a different way by the law. So they weren't allowed to be citizens, they weren't allowed to occupy certain jobs. But there was actual separation as well, because they separated where they lived. So there was white areas and there was black areas, colored areas, and so they tried to create like a separation in South Africa of independent states based on race. In Palestine, we see a very similar case where the Palestinians don't get a fair go when it comes to citizenship. They're treated as second-class citizens or no citizens at all. They're not allowed to live and go to certain places. And there's numerous examples that show that the Palestinians and the Jews are not treated in the same way. So it's not purely based on color, but it's based on, let's say, religion or ethnicity. They say that in apartheid, the official policy to introduce this deliberate segregation began in 1948, even though previously it was colonialism as it was in, let's say, India or in Egypt. So in 1948, the primary goal was to retain racial segregation by arranging the population into different areas, by restricting African urbanization. So they didn't let the African people build and live wherever they want. And so there was forced removals, as we see happening in East Jerusalem. People are, like, their houses are demolished and they move them and tell them, you can't stay here, you have to live somewhere else. So no freedom of movement. And so in South Africa, there was a problem where, like, there's the colored people. Some people in the same family were white, other people were black. And these families were separated just like that. So if you look white, they take you to some other place to live and to attend a different school and to go to use a different toilet, even though you're from the same family. So you can see how ridiculous the actual discrimination is. It's just based on purely, like, color. Like, they're the same family, the same kind of ideology, but they treat them in a completely different way just because they're a different color. And so with segregation, it helped the state kind of promote fear amongst its white people against the other races. And this is what allowed the population of the white people to support the state. So there was fear, there were many stereotypes to try and justify segregation. And we can see the same case in Palestine, where the Jewish people are always fed with propaganda about the Arabs and how bad they are and how good it is to be away from them. So this is what segregation allows, that separation. But there was an important point that I found that says, even though there was segregation, when it came to a hierarchy, and there was, for example, an employer, they could have servants, and they could have workers of a different race, because this is serving an economic interest. But other than that, there was segregation in, like, education, in public facilities.